may be doing these a little too often or not often enough, depending on your perspective. But here we go. This is another one. I just do these whenever I get like a couple minutes free, and I just need to get something off my mind. And this particular thing that I'm talking about today pertains to something that I submitted a while ago. So I didn't really tell anybody this, but like at the start of June, I think at start of June, I submitted a short story to a short story contest. And then like 4 weeks later, I got an email saying I was on the short list, or I thought it was the short list. And then the winners were announced yesterday. Spoiler, I didn't win. But apparently the short list was the long list. So that's a little bit more of a hit to the ego there. And it got me thinking. They asked for a fiction entry. But what I sent was so like, it was fictional, technically. But I would say it was more like a combination of fiction and nonfiction. I think they call that creative nonfiction, but it wasn't really entirely creative nonfiction because it wasn't set somewhere else. Like it's like a creative memoir, I guess. But I guess all memoirs are creative memoirs in that way, at least a little bit, because if you're not spinning your own life in some way, at least, then it can't be very interesting unless you're like Barack Obama and you've led the most interesting life in the history of the human race, right? You have to spin it in some way. You have to tell a story. And this got me thinking about a completely different topic, which is an author I talked about previously on a Dreamtime video, I think, which is Karl Ove Knausgaard. And somebody I read somewhere described him as the modern day Charles Dickens, which makes no sense to me why you would call him that, other than that his books are really long. I have no reason to why anyone would think that would be an accurate description of this guy. So, like I said on the previous Dreamtime, he writes in like almost like a day by day account, not day by day, but like a very like granular account of his own life. And he treats his own life like a story, and it takes him 6 volumes to tell his story up to the point which he has existed at that point, right? So he's only like 40 something, so he can't tell the story of his entire life. But like we all know that the most interesting parts of our lives at the very beginning, right? Which is kind of depressing in a way, but also kind of cool in a way. It's like living through the 1900s, right? Life would have sucked in the 1900s. There's like 2 world wars, like 3 depressions, like fucking Vietnam. Like it would have been complete shit. But when you look back on it, you'll be like, oh damn, that was a really cool time to be alive. And that's kind of how I feel about living as a young person, a relatively young person. I'm not that young. Where you feel like every day you grow so much, or your viewpoint on the world changes so much, but it's also sad because it means it's on a downward slope, right? It only goes up until you're like 25, and then it goes down from there. That's what people say anyway. So you can live every day to its fullest, knowing that these are the most entertaining days you're going to have, because when you're old, presumably you won't be able to change your viewpoint as easily, is what people say. I don't know. I feel like if I was 57, if I was 57 right now, I would be able to change my viewpoint. But I think it's the process of becoming 57 that changes who you are into a person, where you can't change your life perspective that easily. Like over the past month and a half, I would say, since I started this summer course on philosophy, I feel like my approach to a lot of things has changed a lot. And I'm young enough that I can realize that this kind of change is normal for someone as young as I am. I'm saying young so much, I make it sound like I'm 13. I'm not. I'm 22. So that's really not young. It's comparatively young to most people. The average age is like 40, if you think about it, right? That's like the median age of all people everywhere, except in like countries where you die at 40. The natural human lifespan is supposed to be like 40 years old. We've just grossly lengthened it with all our medicine and shit. So the point that I was trying to say is this guy writes about his life to such a granular extent, but what he like, and he's been hailed as like the second coming of fucking Jesus Christ, because he thought to use his life as a story, which, if you think about it, is like the most obvious idea ever. It's the obvious idea to do if you want to write a story. If you want to write a story into a book and you want that story to be meaningful to you, the most obvious solution is to pick the story that you are most familiar with, which is your own story, right? So the fact that these books get treated like they're so unique is weird, but that's where you have to realize that it's not because just anyone told their story, right? It's not like there are people with better life stories than him, for sure. Like almost guaranteed that there are many, many people with more interesting life stories than Karl Ove Knausgaard. But he's an amazing writer. That's the difference. It's not what you're telling, it's how you tell it, right? So the important part to realize is that even if you're writing something fictional, right? I don't think there's any such thing as truly fictional. Like something that's 100% fictional wouldn't make sense to us at all because it wouldn't be based on anything that we're familiar with at all. Like the concepts that we're familiar with in day-to-day life have truth in them, like cause and effect, like gravity, like we assume that two lines pointing in the same direction eventually meet. Like all these concepts have some truth. To sort of write something that is completely devoid of truth would be what I call complete fiction. I don't think that's possible. Or if it is possible, it wouldn't be fun to read. Or maybe it would be fun to read, I don't know. But I don't think it would be useful at all in any way. So really, it's not a matter of whether there is truth in fiction. It's a matter of how much truth there is in fiction, right? That's the truth in fiction thing. It's like there will be truth in fiction, 100% guaranteed. Even if you have like a fantasy story set in a sci-fi universe or whatever the fuck, there is truth. Like all these stories deal with human characters, and the setting is just a different way to approach a certain topic that you might think like, oh, this is not a thing that can be addressed the most effectively in our regular day-to-day life. And a lot of my favorite science fiction writers do this, right? Like Isaac Asimov isn't the most the best linguistic writer in the world. Like his style is not the most literary or anything like that, but he has the best ideas of like what will happen in the future and like asking questions about humanity and how they deal with technology and everything. I didn't want to go on about Asimov. I really like him, but I think that's why people connect to these stories, because there is truth in the fiction. And I was listening to an interview with David Foster Wallace, which is someone I've been listening to more and more interviews of lately. More thoughts on that later. But he was talking about how there's like a level of artifice in most books. It's like when you read a book, you know that you're reading a book, right? And there was this time in like the early 1900s or the late 1800s when the novel really came into like its state of dominance that it has today in the literary oeuvre, where the novel became really famous for this purpose. Like it was released as a set of serialized chapters, which were later collected into a volume and published as a single work, right? We don't really think of novels in that way now, but they were originally serialized. So they were long. They dealt with usually like a person's entire life or something like that. That was like the scope of a novel. But now the medium has been expanded to such an extent that you can basically do whatever you want with it, right? And we've progressed to an extent where the reader is so familiar with the concept of what a novel is, and the writer of the novel knows that the reader is so familiar with this concept that they can toy with the concept. They can play with the idea of what should be in a novel and what shouldn't be, and they can be irreverent to the medium and be like self-aware of a novel, like, oh, this novel is so long inside the novel and stuff like that. But he was talking about how that isn't so useful, or it's kind of run its use. So this is where I draw the distinction between modernism and postmodernism, right? Modernism is a movement that like it's like an enlightenment-based movement, Immanuel Kant-based movement, where like there are certain rules, there's like a structure, these are the truths that we know. There are absolute truths that can be known. And then postmodernism comes along and just blows that all up. And it says, there's no truth that we know. Everything is subjective. Even the words that are coming out of your mouth right now are subjective. Everything is completely relative. Nothing makes any sense. And I made a whole podcast about how this shit, but not entirely related, but kind of related, but that's not the point. The point is, these two are complete opposites of each other. Like, one came after the other and is defined by what it is not. Like modernism is a set of rules, and postmodernism is a set of rules caused by the existence of modernism in the first place, which help them to counter against that, because that's usually how schools of thought come into being. People like get radically upset with the school of thought that came before them, and then they do something about it, right? So the postmodernists were like, hey, we don't like modernism, so we're just gonna, nothing is nothing, there's nothing. But we're almost like 40, 50 years into postmodernism at this point, and this shit can get a little bit tiring, right? If you ever watched an episode of Family Guy, you know what I'm talking about. It's just nonstop machine gun referencing to other properties, and like that is meta humor, and self-referencing is all postmodernist things, because it toys with the idea that you know that it's a TV show. Like yeah, and it's just it's deconstructing something, but after you deconstruct something, there's not anything left. There's nothing to behold. There's no sense of awe. There's no emotional connection. That's it. After you deconstruct something, it's just lying on the ground in various parts, and you kind of feel pity for the thing that you just deconstructed. So I don't know why I said that, but what I was trying to say is there's truth in fiction, right? And when you write fiction in the new age, I think you don't even have to be conscious of this whole thing, but I think it just happens naturally. Like things that are being made now, just automatically, because of the collective thought of society as a whole, which is moving in a direction away from postmodernism, I would think. We're done with deconstructing stuff. We want something. We want some meaning. This is like a post-enlightenment type school of thought, where we want some meaning, but we've been told that there is no meaning. And before that, we were told a false meaning. So we're searching for a real meaning. Do you get what I mean? Probably not, but hey, I just thought I'd say that piece. So that's just something that came into my head when I was thinking about how fiction works in the new age. And I'll probably do a whole nother rant about how the vlog is a thing, but hey, okay, that's enough for now. I don't want to make these too long. So yeah, bye.